We're heading into week 6 fantasy football, and we still have 5 total defenses that are averaging more than 10 fantasy points per game. That is insane. We are getting great production from our fantasy defenses this year. So before we go through the week 6 defense rankings, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers who does defense rankings on a consistent basis and covers it more than one time per week. So going down to our first tier right here, I've got the Chargers defense at number 1. They're at Denver this week, and this one might sound a little off, right? The Chargers defense hasn't been bad. It's actually been really good, but the fact that the Denver Broncos are actually starting to look good, they just put up 30 plus points on the Las Vegas Raiders last week. Looks like they might be hitting their stride a little bit with Bo Nix and Sean Payton at the helm. Here's what we need to keep into account though. The Chargers are coming off a bye week here. That's a major thing for the Chargers, who were definitely injured before they ended up on their bye week. Their defense was a little banged up. Their offense was a little banged up as well. Derwin James was serving a suspension that was really stupid, but he's back now. They've got Joey Bosa potentially coming back, and a lot of their pieces on offense are coming back as well. Obviously, that offensive part is not exactly relevant, but what the Chargers are doing right now is they're still getting an interception per game, and they're getting a fumble recovery per game. The one thing the Broncos have done is turn the ball over offensively. Bo Nix has been sloppy at times, and that's the exact type of game I see in a very low-scoring game. As you can see, Vegas is expecting little points. I'm expecting a little amount of points. I got the Chargers defense at number 1 this week, and the Bears defense at number 2. The Bears defense is fantastic, and they're taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars here. Now, here's the deal with this one. I actually don't think it's inconceivable that the Jags end up putting up 25 or more points on the Bears in this game. Jags offense has been a little bit more potent over the last several weeks. So with the Bears, it's like, are they really going to have that great of a fantasy week? Here's what separates great fantasy defenses from great NFL defenses. Now, the Bears are a great NFL defense. I want to make sure that is clear with people on the Bears defense. They're fantastic. But the Bears defense is so great in fantasy because they're getting the sacks that they need per game, almost 3 on a per game basis. Their interceptions over a pick per game, over a fumble recovery per game, a forced fumble per game, and a defensive touchdown that they got, obviously, in that week 1 matchup. The Bears defense is averaging 11.4 fantasy points per game because they're doing all the splash plays that you need in fantasy football. And the Jags have a negative turnover differential because they're not exactly the most polished offense. So I think the Bears this week, with that unbelievable secondary and with the pass rush, the Jags have been susceptible to pass rushes, and Lawrence has been susceptible to interceptions. I'm going with the Bears at number 2. And then to round out the tier, the Packers at number 3, taking on the Arizona Cardinals at home this week. I actually think this is going to be a really high-scoring matchup. That's the irony of this one, is I think the Packers and the Cardinals are honestly going to get into a really big shootout here. There's several reasons the Packers are here at number 3. As I was just saying with the Bears defense, the Packers defense, they do everything. I mean, literally, they're getting so many turnovers, so many sacks per game. They're even doing better than the Bears are, as far as both of those metrics are. Almost 2 picks per game. Unbelievable. Almost 2 fumble recoveries per game. Unreal. And over 3 sacks per game. That's what the Packers defense is doing. So even if they give up 24, 30 points to the Cardinals, if they walk away with 2 interceptions and a forced fumble and a couple sacks, they're going to end up doing really well in fantasy. And the other part to this is the Cardinals are definitely a team that's hot and cold. Obviously, they beat the 49ers this past week, which nobody was really expecting them to do. And that's just the nature of the Cardinals here. They're hot, they're cold, sometimes they're really, really cold. And if they're cold, the Packers defense might be the defense number 1. But at the very least, I like them as my number 3 defense this week. Dropping down to our next tier right here, the Colts defense at the Tennessee Titans this week. Listen, this is totally dependent on Will Levis coming back. I got flack a couple weeks ago for ranking a defense that was playing Will Levis really high, and people were like, well, I don't see this one. It's like, listen, Will Levis is giving away interceptions like they're candy. Like, he's just throwing the ball to other teams. So they come off a bye week. Everything I've seen indicates the possibility that Will Levis does come back and play for them this week. And everything that Brian Callahan says, the head coach, says that, of course, he's our guy. That's exactly what we want from a defensive perspective. So the Colts, I'm not wild on their defense. I don't think they're a great defense at all, but I'm going to continue to play defenses that are playing Will Levis until it's proven to be a false thing to do. I mean, this is just the reality. We are getting gifted with interceptions, turnovers, fumbles from Will Levis because he is just a mistake-prone player. So I'm going to go ahead and play the Colts this week. If Will Levis doesn't play and it's Mason Rudolph, they'll probably bump down a couple spots. But if Will Levis does play, I've got the Colts here at 4. The Texans defense at 5. Taking on the New England Patriots in New England this week. Listen, the Texans defense really should be a lot higher. Like, I have a lot of confidence in the matchup here. And just before I started filming, Drake May was announced as the starter for the New England Patriots this week. Now, that may be kind of I don't know how people will take that. The way I take it is this. Listen, this offense, with or without Drake May, is in shambles. Like, their offensive line is terrible. Why do you think they had Jacoby Brissett starting the amount of games that he did? Because he was kind of like there to get killed. Like, that was his responsibility, was to be the placeholder so Drake May didn't get killed. It's so bad in New England that they had to make this move. But the Texans defense, like, from an NFL perspective, not a bad defense here. Just from a fantasy perspective, they're not producing. But if you can get 5 sacks in this game, which is very possible against the New England Patriots, and hold them to very few points, which I and Vegas are expecting, the Texans defense ends up having a pretty good week. And the Bills defense to round out this tier at 6. At the New York Jets this week, I think the Jets are about to implode. I think it's arguable they already did. They fired Robert Saleh today in a move that some may view as a good move. I personally think he was one of the more effective coaches on that roster. Like, I think they are a train wreck because now essentially Nate Hackett, the offensive coordinator, is going to have free reign to do whatever he wants offensively, and that has proved to be a bad recipe, man. So the Bills defense here, they actually did really well against the Texans last week with injuries. So if we can get a little bit healthier on the Bills defensive side of the ball this week, I like the chances here for the Bills this week. They're averaging more than 1 turnover per game. They're averaging an interception per game and a fumble recovery per game. The Bills defense is legit, and I think the matchup this week, they're actually going to end up killing the Jets this week. Now, dropping on to our next tier right here. Here's where we start to get uncertain because I've got the Eagles defense at number 7. They're taking on the Cleveland Browns, and much like I do with Will Levis, any defense that plays Deshaun Watson, I will play them in fantasy football until I am proven that I am having a wrong method. Deshaun Watson is horrible. He's an embarrassment. And Deshaun Watson is turning the ball over and getting sacked a bunch. So even if the Eagles don't hold the Browns to few points, which I don't see how it's possible, coming off a bye week, and their defense does have talent and Vic Fangio there, I think this is a layup game for Vic Fangio to get this defense right. I'm playing the Eagles defense this week. It sounds horrible. They've been horrible in fantasy, but this matchup is just proving to be a really good one over the course of the weeks. Even the Commanders just did really well against the Browns offense because Deshaun Watson sucks. At number 8, I've got the Broncos defense versus the Los Angeles Chargers this week. This obviously is going to be a contested one because the Broncos defense has been fantastic. I have been touting the Broncos defense for weeks now, even in some of their lower moments, and they obviously paid off last week. So what gives here? The matchup is really good, I think, against the Chargers. This is going to be a low-scoring game in a divisional matchup. I don't think that this is a particularly great week for the Broncos here, and I'll tell you why. So obviously it is a low-scoring matchup. I've got the Broncos defense inside the top 10 for a very good reason, because they're a very good defense in a low-scoring matchup here. The Broncos defense has also been really active getting after the quarterback. They're averaging almost 4 sacks per game, and obviously their secondary is led by Pat Surtain. So with the Broncos defense here, I think they're going to run into some challenges. Number 1, the Chargers offensive line should be healthier coming out of the bye week. They should be, at the very least, getting Joe Alt back. Whether Rashawn Slater comes back, that's a different story. Number 2, with Pat Surtain, I don't think he has a particular matchup to really worry about here, because when you think of Ladd McConkey, who is their number 1 wide receiver, that guy's in the slot a lot. So I do think there will be a lot of situations where Pat Surtain is kind of free roaming the field a little bit, not being able to really lock down a true number 1. So I do think that the Broncos defense is going to be good this week. I think they'll still get after Herbert to a certain extent, but I do think that the Broncos defense may end up having a worse week in fantasy than a lot of people do think they will for the rest of the season of fantasy football. At number 9 here, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Las Vegas Raiders this week. And I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, listen, I say this about this defense every year. This is a defense that is really keen on big plays. They're keen on turnovers. They're keen on sacks. They make things happen. That's how they get fantasy football weeks that are really good. And at the beginning of the season, they were holding to opponents to very few points. Some potent offenses like the Falcons here. So with the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, I am telling you guys, trouble is on the horizon. Not only is the Pittsburgh Steelers defense starting to look worse over the last 2 weeks versus Dak Prescott and Joe Flacco, this defense is also dealing with tons of injuries. Their 2 pass rushers that are opposite TJ Watt, Herbig and Highsmith, they're both out this week. DeMarvin Leal, who came in to replace them, yeah, he's out too. So this Steelers defense is so reliant on TJ Watt. He's a great player, and the Raiders are having lots of issues themselves right now. So I want to have a defense that plays them, but I'm just telling you, I think the Steelers will disappoint because matchup says that they should be a great play. I ultimately think that the Steelers are going to have their own set of issues this week. And then to round out the tier, the 49ers defense at number 10, taking on the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday nights here. So with the 49ers defense, I think that they are obviously lightning rod. I mean, they're playing fast, they're playing mean, they're physical. This is a defense that looked fantastic even in a loss against the Arizona Cardinals in fantasy football. They're averaging 10 fantasy points per game because of 3 sacks per game. They're averaging 10 fantasy points per game because of all the interceptions that they can get along with the fumble recoveries. So with the 49ers this week, there's just a couple things that we need to consider again. More injuries to this team, and the fact that it's a Thursday night game gives them less time to get healthy, and they're also playing an offense that I do think is also really potent. Like, the week against Giants, obviously, that was a bad week for the Seattle Seahawks. I think this is going to be a much different game. I actually am expecting a lot of points in this game, but what we can get from the San Francisco 49ers defense this week is some sacks and potentially an interception opportunity or a couple of fumbles here. So the 49ers defense, just because of the way they're playing, they're inside my top 10, but I do worry about this matchup a little bit. But I'll tell you one thing I'm not feeling very shaky on. Brock Purdy hitting higher than 0.5 total yards. That is what his projection is on Underdog this week. So obviously you got to take advantage of this projection right here. And if you haven't gotten on Underdog yet to take advantage, go down in the comments, use that link that's there, and when you use code FFN to sign up for Underdog, not only will they match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, but you'll also be able to get in on this Brock Purdy sweat-free projection this week. Now, jumping down to our last tier right here, the Arizona Cardinals this week. I've got them here against the Packers, and again, I think this is going to be a high-scoring matchup. And particularly, the Packers' offense looks really hard to stop right now. But there's one thing that the Packers are doing, and that's turning the ball over. Jordan Love has been mistake-prone this year. That's his problem so far. So again, even if the Cardinals don't hold them to under 30 points, the Cardinals defense could have a good week. They had a good week against the 49ers last week because they're aggressive, they're getting sacks, and they're getting turnovers. This is what the Packers are doing. They're turning the ball over. So I do think that there's fantasy points to be had on the Cardinals side of the ball this week, and that's why I've got them at number 11. And then to round it all out, the New Orleans Saints this week taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in New Orleans this week. The Saints, they're just collectively looking a lot worse. Obviously, they're on a 3-game losing streak. When did they get right? And this isn't a particularly strong matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There were some other defenses I was considering. Ironically, I was considering putting the Bucs defense at number 12. The Bucs defense is so bad, and the difference is the Saints defense is actually really good. Like, even against the Chiefs, that game could have easily been more out of hand. Their defense was the one that was keeping them in the game. That's one thing that Dennis Allen can do, is coach a defense. He's leading them to 3 sacks per game and over an interception per game. 1.5 interceptions per game because this defense is talented, they've got playmakers, and they play physical. So even if they don't beat the Bucs this week, I do think their defense ends up having a good game in fantasy. And as I do at the end of every single defense ranking video, I give you my favorite defense to pick up in advance for next week if you have the roster space available to do this move. And this defense, I didn't even think they'd see the day inside my top 12. This is a very rare occurrence, but they played well last week, and the Rams defense in week 7, coming off the bye week, has the Raiders defense at home in Los Angeles. The matchup is obviously fantastic. The Raiders are crumbling before our very eyes right now. Coming off a bye week, they're going to get healthier, obviously. So the Rams are in good position here. And again, they had a really good fantasy performance on defense last week versus the Packers because they made them turn the ball over. So you put them in front of Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew or whoever they throw out there at quarterback and at running back. I don't care what the personnel is. I'm taking the Rams defense this week because they're on a lot of waiver wires. So let me know how your team teams looking so far this week. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for this week, click on this video right here.